Both routes shared some 2 kilometers of track, for example here in front of the main railway station. Langensalzeyerstraße, trailers had to be transferred between outbound and inbound trains, owing to the absence of a loop at Oststadt. Between 1930 and 1933, Eisenach acquired 4 Lindner-built trailers from Erfurt. Seen at Oststadt, number 44 was one of 6 motor cars built in 1938. Having passed through the Karlsruhe, 2 cars meet in the square of German-Soviet friendship. Today, this attractive square has resumed its old name of Karlsplatz. Until 1958, it had also been the junction for the line up to Marienthal. Through the Karlstraße and into the impressive marketplace, dominated by its elegant Renaissance City Hall. Car 19 heads towards the Westbahnhof. This was one of a batch of 6 cars built by Wagenbau Gotha in 1929. Katharinenstraße had this stretch of gutter-running single track. Note the absence of any other road traffic. Terminus at Eisenach West Station. In Georgenstraße was another very tight curve leading up to the hospital. This was the former terminus serving the hospital, abandoned in January 1969. Veteran trailer number 30 had started life in Cologne in 1896 as a 6-window motor car, subsequently being rebuilt into a 3-window trailer in 1950. Action first outside the main railway station. Line 2 used single cars on the route to the Ostbahnhof. Following the long picturesque Thuringerwaldbahn out towards Tabatz, a total distance of just under 22 kilometers. These cars were built at the local Gotha tram factory. Amongst the rush hour activity in Sundhausen was this very interesting baggage car. At the time of Phil's visit, the aptly named triangular junction at Gleisdreieck was still very much in original condition, set in a large open space flanked by old steel pylons. Here passengers could transfer onto the branch to Waltershausen, normally worked as a shuttle. During the season, the interurbans carried extremely heavy traffic. Roving conductors were still employed, and special return tickets to the nearby open-air swimming pool were available. Car 50, built in 1929, was on the 2.5-kilometre Waltershausen shuttle. Later, it would serve as a works car between 1971 and 1976. These next scenes show the old terminal layout at Waltershausen. In 1972, this would be replaced by a one-way loop. Running along the interurban towards Gotha. 1967, Gotha built articulated cars with a special 2+1 seating arrangement had started to replace the older stock on the interurban. Returning towards the centre of Gotha. Hüttenplatz, junction with the single cars on line 2. '43 was the prototype for a generation of standard Gotha 2-axle cars. Dating from 1955, 38 to 42 were also forerunners of the later mass-produced Gothas. In 1968, Erfurt had a highly efficient meter-gauge system consisting of 7 routes, 2 confined to rush hours only. Fleet modernization had included the acquisition of Gotha 2-axle and 2 rooms and a bath articulated cars. This terminal loop used by Route 2 would subsequently be rebuilt in 1979. Cars on the 4 for Breitscheidstrasse loaded outside the station. This 2-kilometre section being abandoned in 1973. After leaving Breitscheidstrasse, the 4s ran across town to Thuringenhalle. Line 1 had some older Gotha-built cars dating from 1936 onwards. This centre entrance trailer was a Gotha prototype dating from 1954. The first 2 rooms and a bath had arrived in Erfurt in 1959. This terminal arrangement at Erfurt Nord survived until 1971. There was always heavy traffic through the major junction at Anger. Erfurt's trolleybuses lasted until 1974. Although the route to the Domplatz would be abandoned in 1978, trams are now once again serving this attractive area. East of Erfurt lies the industrial city of Jena, which in 1968 had a compact meter-gauge system worked by a fleet of 2-axle pre-war and post-war Löwe and Gotha cars. Travelling from the town centre along Line 1 towards Svetzen. To improve service to the newer, rapidly expanding parts of this city, the route was slowly rebuilt during 1961 to 1979 with double track as far as Halberstadt. At the time of Phil's visit, the building works were causing the route to be worked in sections. At the limit of the double track, another motor car would wait to couple up to the trailer for the run back to town. This single motor car was shuttling to and from Svetzen, an area then with a strong Soviet military presence. These form part of a batch of 11 Gotha-built cars dating from 1923. Löwe car 111 approaches from the Holzmarkt. The trailers had started life in Weimar as motor cars, being converted to trailers in the 60s. With the Winseler Loop under reconstruction, manoeuvres at the terminus required the use of an additional motor car. At the time of Phil's visit, the smallest urban tramway in the GDR was completely intact, with trams still running through the old world town centre. Naumburg was really a living museum. From the railway station, the little meter-gauge tram set off in both directions around a predominantly single-track circular route. Leaving the station and turning into Bahnhofstrasse at the start of the clockwise trip round the Linden Ring, a distance of 5.3 kilometers. At Jägerplatz, a motor car and trailer passes on the anti-clockwise service. In the picturesque old town with its splendid market square. This section would be abandoned in 1976. Car 11 rumbles into the sunset en route to the station. Phil visited Magdeburg at just the right time. A year later, and a new fleet of Tatras would wipe out all the older rolling stock, still working on the city's 12 standard gauge routes, 2 of which only ran in rush hours. Amongst the pre-war fleet was 141, built in Düsseldorf and rebuilt in Gotha in 1956. In 1968, the newest trams were 14 Gotha-built bogie cars, delivered between 1962 and 1964. However, on arrival at the Tatras, these would be transferred en bloc to East Berlin. The loop in front of the central station was used by lines 3, 12 and 22. One of the original trains from a former independent interurban could still be seen on line 12. A wonderful mix of cars in action in the central area. (145) meets one of the legendary small Hecht or pike cars. This was one of a batch of 18 built by Niesky between 1938 and 1944. (138) of 1929 hauls 2 trailers along the tram and pedestrian mall at the northern end of Karl-Marx-Straße. Magdeburg had been heavily bombed at the end of the war. With the arrival of new rolling stock, older vehicles, many in poor condition, would go for scrap. This is Waltershausen depot. A Gotha set on line 4. The year after Phil's visit, Magdeburg would become the first city in the GDR to be operated entirely by Tatra bogie cars. This was yet another small meter-gauge gem. In 1968, the trams to the station still followed the original twisting course by way of Breiterweg, Magdeburgstrasse and Bahnhofstrasse. Halberstadt cars carried no route numbers and were unusual in having different route patterns at weekends. Amongst older sets still in service was number 34, built by Lindner in 1942. Trailer 52, built by Fuchs in Heidelberg in 1913, had previously worked in Karlsruhe. Transfers were allowed between the connecting services at the fish market, the operational hub of the system. A pre-war Lindner car was seen together with post-war two-axle Löwe and Gotha cars. Descending the steep hill into the scenic part of the old town. Amidst the superb timber frame buildings in the narrow Domnikanerstrasse was junction for the route to the cemetery. Here the cars reversed by using the depot triangular junction. In Gröperstrasse, a pre-war train heading for the cemetery passes Löwe motorcar 36, built by Gotha in 1956. Phil now followed the branch to Vogtei, passing more of the town's wealth of historic buildings. In 1963, this terminus had been rebuilt and featured this picturesque reversing Y. Tram stop on the Herbeckstrasse is on a curve, and from here the line goes back towards the centre. In the other direction, there was a single track with 2 passing loops. With virtually no private cars, the trams were still the principal form of transport. 35 years later, this section is only operated at weekends. This was another small meter-gauge tramway. With just 2 routes, it was operated by single 2-axle cars, the oldest being from a batch of 8 built in Wismar in 1934. This was Nordhausen's first new post-war motorcar, Löwe No. 30, built in Werdau in 1951. Tackling the steep hill up from the town centre. Like Magdeburg, much of Nordhausen had been virtually flattened during the Second World War. This was the passing point for trams on the main route. Schachtelberger Straße. Since 1956, cars to Altentor have been cut back from the station to terminate here at Arnoldstraße. Interestingly, this was the second car to come from Erfurt and carry the number 29 in Nordhausen. Supplied to Erfurt in 1944, it ran in Nordhausen from 1967 to 1971. Passing Gotha car number 40 at Grimmel. A sweeping curve carried the cars to the terminus at Altentor. The tracks along Hüttenstraße had been doubled during the 1950s. By 1972, the delightful pre-war cars would be replaced by second-hand Gotha cars from Halle and Gera. Because so little had changed during the intervening 65 years, Mühlhausen remained a tramway time warp. This was one of 3 motor cars acquired from Erfurt. During this time, there was considerable movement of cars between the various GDR systems. Passing the depot, built in 1912. Motorcar 42 and trailer 15 en route to the railway station. To reduce costs, the bodies of numbers 42 to 45 had been built in the company workshops in the mid-20s and mounted on manned trucks. In front of the station, the motor cars ran round their trailers. To do this, the motor car used part of the route abandoned in July 1968. These ancient summer trailers, delivered in 1899 and fitted with closed platforms in the 50s, survived in service until final closure. From the restaurant Erfurter Tour, the line goes into the Erfurter Straße. This double curve marked the beginning of the picturesque suburban line to Sumwalde, meaning literally at the forest. This passing loop was situated in front of the Schwanenteig restaurant. Approaching the outer terminus at Sumwalde. During the Second World War, a track was laid here leading into an ammunition factory.